Hey guys, this is Chris from DSX Machina, and this week I want to talk about firearms, specifically firearm rules and damage values. I was sent some PDFs from another game designer, a team I greatly respect, and I'm not really going to give their name because I don't want to come off as being critical. I think that'd be unprofessional, and I think that there's the possibility in the future where I'd like to invite them and have a conversation about design decisions in 5th edition, specifically regarding firearms. Now, all the way back to some of the earlier editions of Ultramodern 5, to the first version of Amethyst, going all the way back to 4th edition, when Dungeons & Dragons operated traditional forums. I don't think they really do that anymore. There was a lot of conversations regarding damage values, and I am sure I have talked about it before here, but I want to talk about it again because when I looked at this book, and I looked at the firearms, because this one had firearm rules. It was not modern. It was a time period of where there were firearms. Just it wasn't like Ultramodern where we had long firearms, but there are carryover. I have weapons in my book that they have in theirs, so there is some carryover. But I think like they have a fantastic product, but I noticed they did something that is a very common decision. I'm going to try to avoid the saying I think it's misguided, but it always comes into this belief about real world applications of gameplay mechanics. I keep on pointing this direction, but it's this direction, so it's just and it comes down to damage outputs. Now we know that within the 5th edition framework, the standard range for melee damage is between 1d6. There are a few people who still have 1d4 weapons, but not very many. Most people who are engaged in melee combat generally use a weapon that does between 1d6 and 2d6 damage. 1d8, 1d10, 1d12. There are no melee weapons that do 2d12 or 4d6 damage. There's no melee weapons that do that. Within the ranged category, we see that ranged weapons generally, because there's not a lot of ranged weapons in base 5th edition D&D, or 5th edition general, we're limited to 1d10 to 1d12. I think there are some weapons that do 1d6, but longbow, crossbow, we're looking at the 1d8, 1d10 range. And that's the application. Now, there is a balancing reason why these weapons are relatively limited. But the point is that your attribute modifier generally is going to eat up 35 to 45% of your damage output. So if you're doing a 1d6, you're generally going to have a a plus 2 to plus 3 damage a modifier. So that's nearly 50%, even at a 1d12. If you're, and this is basically how the system works, if you're like a person that's going to have a 1d12 weapon, it's generally assumed that you're going to have a strength that's going to be comparable. No one's going to have a 1d12 flail or a hammer or a great axe. I think the great axe, I have to, running off the top of my head, and then have a 14 strength. Generally, they're going to have a 16 or strength up, which means you're still looking at 20 to 30% of the damage output is being determined by a fixed modifier. And then a lot of that also comes into your class. We know that barbarians and fighters all have ways of increasing damage output, or at least allowing them to attack more often. We have the rogue, which has an astoundingly powerful sneak attack value, where a large percentage, in some cases 60 to 70, eventually 80 to 90% of your damage output is determined by something that has nothing to do with the weapon you are using. The weapon allows you to use that ability, but your own ability as a rogue is what's determining the damage output, not the actual die attached to that weapon. We made the decision, I say we, but it was my decision, to keep all of our firearms within the same scale. This was a very important design decision because it balances us with 5th edition architecture. That means when we look at something like a caseless rifle, or even a regular rifle, if we were to go to here and look into something that is an old-fashioned weapon, an old-fashioned one-handed small arm, but you guys can see that. There we go. Here, we're looking at a bolt rifle, which is an old-time weapon, does 1.8 piercing. This is relative in scale to melee weapons. Now, there is a belief to the point where I will admit, many years ago, I don't get it anymore, but I used to get a lot of attacks online for people, and so many people do. They look at this table and they automatically say, well, those damage values are pathetic. They're way too low. And I always ask the same question: where's your metric? Like, where are you getting? Why do you say that? It's because a bolt rifle is 1.8. It does the exact same amount of damage as the vast majority of the melee weapons. But what ends up happening is that they generally will always compare it to a longbow. They won't compare it to the damage value for all the martial weapons. They'll look entirely for the melee weapons, but with the range weapons specifically. And they'll say, well, a crossbow does between 1.8 and 1.10. Longbows can do 1.10. Therefore, a firearm must do 2 or 3 times more damage than that. And I always kind of ask the question, like, where is your why are you trying to apply real world mechanics to the 5th edition architecture? Because obviously it's not true. Because someone said at this point says, well, that means a bolt rifle should do like a regular firearm should do along even the basic sniper rifle here does 1.8. Obviously that is way underpowered. It should do 4.8. So you're saying it should do 4 times more damage than a long sword. So like, a great axe is 1.12. A great sword does 2.6. So you're saying that a giant axe that will lop someone's head off, that will cleave someone in twain, is half as powerful than a basic rifle. But that's not what they do. They look specifically to the base damage. Like the crossbow does 1.6. Therefore, because it's a small bolt, a bullet must do 4 or 5 times more damage. And I always look at it and go, like, where are you getting that application, that belief? And then there are people that say, if you don't understand it, then you shouldn't be designing games. I had actually had someone make that argument that I should not be designing firearm rules if I cannot understand how much more damage a pistol or a bullet will do more than an arrow. And the point is, I do, and it doesn't matter because it has nothing to do with real world application. For one thing, a person's going to have, they make jokes the fact that a real world person is going to have 4 hit points. Therefore, it's unrealistic for anyone to have, if you wanted to apply real world, then you could still have a firearm do 1.10 damage because everybody would have 4 hit points, and that would be it. You would never have someone have more than 4 hit points because you can, any person can be killed with a knife. Just have, one critical hit with a knife will kill someone because a knife can kill someone in real life. But a knife can never kill anyone in D&D, ever, unless they're a high-level rogue who themselves would have enough hit points to survive the type of damage that they're inflicting. So real-world applications out the window, and yet there is this kind of belief, and it's arbitrary. We look at how much, and penetration, the power of penetration that a bullet has over a longbow, and it's also not applicable. There's a lot of evidence when they did tests and so forth that a longbow, for example, doesn't have obviously the velocity, but it does have the mass. So, strangely enough, they had a bucket of sand, and a bullet would stop basically an inch into the sand, but the longbow would actually almost go right through because of the physics of that. The physics changes based on that type of that idea. I can definitely see it if you're using a 50 caliber weapon, and obviously that has a lot of damage output. It's more powerful, but to say that a bolt action rifle should do 4.10 because of some arbitrary idea that it should do 4 times more damage than a bow, it also throws in a huge imbalance because technically a first level character can then get a bolt rifle and they become capable of outputting way more damage than their level should be able to at that capacity, and the game is built entirely for that balance. So when people look at the bolt rifle in my game and says 1 die 8, I mean, that's a sniper should be able to kill someone. I go, yeah, a sniper can. The sniper class, it possesses numerous abilities that allow them to increase the damage output of these weapons, to increase the critical ratio, and impose status effects. That's what the sniper class can do. Similarly, some of our other classes have other effects that allow them to play around with the damage values of these weapons or be able to do things. For example, the grounder and the heavy can use these automatic weapons to lay down suppressing fire area effects. So they're not just hitting one target on attack, they could hit 4 or 5. And suddenly that damage output is now being not spread out. It's actually being focused on multiple targets. The same damage output's being hit by multiple targets at the same time. We're not devaluing that damage. So there's a lot of reasons why we do that. And of course, we do have obviously more powerful weapons. We can actually look here and you can see, this. We do have more powerful weapons. In fact, if you go into heavy weapons here, you'll notice the value doesn't really go up that much higher, because there's usually a lot of other effects. For example, we have auto heavy, which does increase the damage. There is, and we move into something like, can't see the super heavy weapons, but we can see a few things here. Stopping, but this is a 2-bore stopping rifle, and we can see what it does. It actually does 1 die 10 plus 10. So it's a 2 die 10 weapon, but 1 die is maximized. And that's basically how we do it. And that's the top end of our damage outputs. We have rocket launchers, but this is a direct hit. I mean, you're hit directly with a rocket launcher, and then there is that's the damage for the blast radius. This is the direct damage if you get hit with a rocket launcher direct. So that there are examples of this, but some people will say that this is too low. Being hit with a rocket launcher should do 10 or 15. When someone was trying to make an argument saying that a pistol should do 4 or 5 times. That's what they're saying. And I was seeing once again a lot of this, where a firearm does 6 die 6 damage, or 6 die 10 damage, or 8 die 10 damage. And I've seen tables with firearm rules where these numbers were this high. I go, great. How do you now balance first level characters with these weapons? Because now they're able to output damage and destroy almost anything. And people are saying, well, that they should be able to. I go, yeah, but that breaks the balance of the game. And this brought up numerous arguments from people saying that that's the reason why 5e doesn't work with ranged combat. And I say it does once you understand how the model works. And the model is you keep the damage values basically all within the same thing. And this is why in video games you can be shot and you could shoot people 20 or 30 times before they die, because it's a game. You're supposed to have fun. And when I asked people, how do you balance low-level characters using daily firearms, they started to create additional rules of how much maximum damage you can inflict with that weapon at a low level, saying the fact that you can't use, like, if it's an 8 die 10 weapon, you cut the damage output by 75% at first level. And I'm like, well, then you're basically you're putting all these mechanics and putting yourself back to what the damage output was when they were simply a 1 die weapon. You just added new rules to justify a hollow argument, and you're basically taking the ownership out of the gun. Into the gun and out of the character. It depends on that mentality of this arbitrary belief that firearms should always do multiple times more damage. Fortunately, the Dungeon Master's Guide, the original 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, on, I think, page 268, did try to offer rules on these systems. Now, the issue here is that, A, these were optional, and they didn't put a lot of effort into the system, and I don't think they bothered to try to balance it. And I think in their opinion, these are, if you were to encounter these types of weapons randomly in your session as one-shots, magical items equivalents, because at the end of the day, they were focusing primarily. Like I said, it's one page between 3 books. And in that, yes, they said an automatic pistol would do 2 die 6 damage. I'm going to ignore the futurist weapons that do 6 die 8 necrotic antimatter damage. because clearly those are not meant to be daily use weapons for early level characters. These are designed to be magic items equivalents that characters encounter as they're going through a dungeon. They're doing it for shits and giggles. They're not doing it thinking that a first level character is going to get a laser rifle and have that as their daily use, because that would break the game. And if they think it doesn't break the game, then they don't know their own system. But even the most powerful weapon, the shotgun, does 2d8 piercing. There are no rules within the book, because this is the reason why I also think that they did this more as an example. They decided to play around to give people it, but they didn't put any real effort in thought. I don't think they even bothered to balance it. For one thing, the shotgun, almost everybody who plays with shotgun rules have rules based off of the damage output. For example, their damage output is a 30-90 for a shotgun, does 2 piercing. There's no additional value if you shoot someone at point blank range. A buckshot, a shotgun shell, is going to dissipate its damage considerably over a certain distance. There's no rules about that. There are no rules about the hunting rifle. It has a good range, but there is nothing regarding accuracy. There's no rules regarding accuracy within these things. And as stated, the automatic rifle and the shotgun basically do the exact same amount of damage. The shotgun has a lower range, but there's no additional rules that are specific. The burst fire rules are very generic, don't have a lot of detail, because there are no classes within those core books that can utilize them in any capacity. But melee weapons do. Melee weapons have tons of unique applications. There are weapons specifically for monk. There are weapons specifically for rogue. And they make a lot of rules. They made no effort to try to blend these classes, these weapons here, with their core classes. And I imagine that, once again, for those people who know, I do intentionally avoid and don't read any other books, especially official books, that conflict with mine, because I don't want to get the impression that I'm copying them. Or trying to pull ideas. But for me, for example, the fact that they have a pistol that does 1d10 piercing, once again, they're implying that a pistol, and which again, a pistol, what does that mean? Is it a 22, a 38, or a 45? That's a pretty generic example. And yeah, I do have pistols that do a lot of damage. I do believe the most powerful pistol I do have. No, I do have a 1d10. I have a 1d10, but most of my pistols do 1d8. So I'm not too far off from their damage output, but they're basically saying that a pistol does the same amount of damage as a halberd. They're saying that those damage values are equal, and that is completely ludicrous if you were to apply them in a real-world scenario. So I've never understood the arguments people try to make that claim that firearms should do not just more damage than melee weapons, but in orders of magnitude more powerful, like where they're doing 2 or 3 times the damage output of a melee weapon, and then trying to explain how that doesn't completely break the early level game. You look at this and go, okay, what happens if a first level ranger gets his hand on a hunting rifle that does 2d10? Now, at this point, they are now doing twice as much damage than the damage output of their normal longbow. Does that not break the mechanics of and offer a massive imbalance to early level characters, or any level characters, period? And then, of course, we talk about the classes themselves having specific abilities. And some of them are obvious, like the tech has a class that allows them to modify their weapons to output more damage. The sniper, obviously, I said, is very much a ranged rogue, so they are able to increase their damage output of their weapons. The grounder, the heavy gets to do it for a couple of their abilities, but they're more focused on area effects, but they do have abilities that allow them to increase their damage. The grounder does. Martial doesn't, but Martial's about battle coordination. Infiltrator allows himself to use his range firearms and close by. Gunslinger isn't about increasing. No, there's a few. I think the Weaver stands and a few allow you to increase the damage of pistols, but it's also about, like a monk, not having high damage, but being able to use it a lot more. So it's not about, oh, this pistol does 1d6. Yes, but the gunslinger gets to use it 4 times in a round, which does, once again, create that balance. So that's the argument. That's the conversation. Why are the damage values in Ultra Modern 5 seemingly low? And the answer is not. They're not intentionally low. They are designed to work with classes, and they are designed to fall in line with the mechanical philosophy of 5th edition. And I find it unusual that game designers try to justify arbitrarily high damage values for ranged firearms. Because I don't believe that you can apply real-world physics to a 5th edition mechanical model like this. But anyway, guys, that was my conversation for today. I appreciate you listening. Comment below. Please be nice. I'm trying to post more positive and more constructive content and not get in negative rants. This is the reason why, like, regardless of my views on AI, I just don't want to talk about it on this channel, just because it creates a lot of triggering conversations and people don't want to have a civilized discourse on topics like this. So I'm trying to avoid that. But I do also want to talk about some cool things. I want to talk, there was a previous video that some people really liked regarding the IPs that I'd like to adapt. And if you're interested in me having a design stream where I take a random game that I've played and we look at designing 5th edition mechanics for that game, let me know in the comments which ones you're interested in. Maybe I'll pick one at random and we'll try it up next week. But anyway, guys, thanks a lot, and I will talk to you later.